Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of In Conversation With. If you're watching on the Twitch channel on Friday, thanks so much for joining. If you could get involved in the chat below, that would be superb. And if you're watching on a rerun, thanks for watching the YouTube channel. Okay, so my guest this week on In Conversation With is currently working as a robotics technical program manager. So really excited to have him on the show, and thanks so much for him for joining. On that note, my guest is Simon Shetty.
Hi, John.
So, hi, Simon. How are you doing? Thanks for joining me.
Doing good, John. How are you?
Yeah, no, very well. I think, obviously, as we were just discussing there before we started this episode, it sounds like we're both up against it with the amount of work that's going on this year. It seems to have ramped up quite significantly.
Yeah. You always tend to underestimate it. It never gets less. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
But never a boring moment. Right.
No, exactly. But firstly, thanks so much for joining me. Really interesting topic area we're about to discuss now, Simon. For those that are watching currently, I don't know if you could just give yourself a little bit of an introduction, let us know what you do, and obviously set the scene for what we're about to talk about. That'd be great.
Awesome. So, I live and work in Silicon Valley in the US, in California. I'm a technical program manager, currently working at a robotics company called Neuro, with the exciting mission of transforming everyday life with all the benefits that robotics can offer. Prior to this, I've worked for the second largest ride-sharing network in the US, Lyft. And prior to that, I have worked as a controls engineer and robotics engineer at Tesla. Spent a couple of years there. Some of the most exciting times spent at Tesla as well. So overall, I've been more of like a robotics person, driving robotics programs, especially in the world of self-driving, and that's what I'm super excited to chat with you about today, John.
No, absolutely. I think when we first sort of touched base over email and you're explaining the areas you're looking to talk with, obviously the show that I kind of run this In Conversation With is very much centered around cloud computing and cloud technologies in general. But clearly, that the whole basis of having that kind of a platform is to support some of these amazing innovations that are going on across the world, and robotics is absolutely, from what I see as a complete novice, I'm hasten to add, it's just fantastic to see some of the innovations that are going on. You've touched on some of them there with, really keen to talk to you around the self-driving cars. There's loads of different areas that we could kind of dip into now, but I guess we'll start off really. Let's talk about, if we can, around robotics. What does it mean for the average person? Because I know that there's a lot of conversation around sort of like the socioeconomic impact on jobs and things in general when we look at robotics. What's your take on that, Simon, at the moment?
Yeah, right. Yeah, we got to address what we call the elephant in the room, which is, hey, what about all these robots taking over the world and like taking away jobs and things like that? So just to give you an analogy, right? Like there are two parts to this. One is the velocity at which this transformation will happen. The second is an analogy, that refers back to all the progress we've made in humanity, right? If you look at, there was a time when we were riding horses on, there were horse carts. And then we have motor vehicles that came along. The horse cart driver did not have the necessary skills to drive a vehicle, and it was a long shot, right? Like even if they needed to upskill them at that point in time, imagine the amount of effort and amount of sort of skill upgradation that would have gone through. So, but at the end of the day, although at that specific point in time in history, we probably had a lot of horse cart drivers being upset and probably denying this change, that vehicles will never take over and things like that. It still happened, and in hindsight, we see that it has brought a lot more velocity, a lot more benefits to humanity in general and created a lot more opportunities in other areas, right? So these are things that, moving ahead into the transformation, we don't necessarily see and acknowledge and understand perfectly. But then in hindsight, when we look at all of these things, we, it's like, wow, yeah, I mean, how could this not have made sense back then, right? That kind of thing. So I think that's more of like the socio-economic thing. But in general, I think when technology evolves, anything that adds efficiency, anything that makes human lives better is going to inevitably win, right? So why don't we structure our society around that concept so that we move towards that direction? That's basically my take on it. And a lot of people in the robotics area share that opinion as well.
No, absolutely. I think it comes from that whole point around, even the Industrial Revolution, where, we moved and steam power was a thing of the age. Of course, there were, like you say, there were people that were upset because of that. But able, I guess, to see those opportunities and what these new technologies are actually going to bring. And I guess, is that the case at the moment? Clearly robotics has been around for decades now with us as a human race. We utilize robotics in anything and everything that you can think of right now. And I think, is it fair to say, Simon, that, as of late, and I don't want to guess at kind of the time span, but certainly when it comes to the more recent decade that we're living in, it just seems that robotics and the intricacy, and when, especially when we talk self-driving cars, seem to have blasted exponentially from going from being these mundane inanimate objects with a bit of programming that go and do a task that a human has configured. When we factor in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning models and things like that, is it fair to say that is kind of on some exponential journey at the moment? And what's your experience like with robotics in that sense?
Yeah, again, I'm going to make a historical reference here, right? So if you look at the amount of time it took humanity to get wings and fly, and the amount of time it took humanity from that point where there was the first flight to when humanity put a human on the moon, right? So you spend like centuries probably working on this problem of even getting your feet off the ground, and then in early 1900s you have you have the first aircraft take off, powered aircraft take off. And then in 1969, you have a man touching down on the moon, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at this trend, it all, adds up. You learn, and the learnings sort of add up. And suddenly at one point, you have sufficient knowledge and understanding of the whole thing where, you start making exponential growth and start doing things that you never thought was possible. And then it takes you by surprise. Oh, wow, like, how did this even happen, right? I think the same is with self-driving as well. Self-driving is an interesting problem, and I would say it's probably the most interesting problem of this century, or the most interesting problem humanity has ever sort of solved, right? Because the reason I'm saying that is if you look at aviation or airplanes and all of those applications, you sure have a lot of technical challenges to solve, but you don't necessarily have obstacles all the time, having to navigate around like unpredictable obstacles and things like that. That's a fair amount of predictability in the systems that this machine will be going into. But in self-driving, that's not the case, right? You have a large amount of, like, you have to be prepared for things that you don't know, and train your vehicle to respond to those things when they occur. So I think that's what makes this problem interesting and much more harder to solve. So if you look at the autonomous vehicle performance over the past few years, you've seen that cars abruptly brake, and they don't they are either overly cautious or under cautious and cause accidents and things like that. But that has gotten much lower these days, and now we have models that are able to like perfectly predict some scenarios, at least within a reasonable sort of confidence degree for you to take action. So if you look at, let's say, again, I love analogies. So if you look at the aerospace world, if you look at the way pilots were manually landing their airplanes, you could like practically feel that bump when you touch the ground. But over the years, these days, if you have a smooth and smooth textbook landings are a common theme now, common trend these days. And if you have a super smooth textbook landing, either the pilot is like super experienced, has done it, and has done it a lot of times, that he has landed that plane again in a very smooth manner that you didn't know that it landed, or most likely the pilot is, no matter what his or her experience is, they are using the instrument landing system and the localizer to actually automatically guide the plane onto the runway, right? So you see that shift in customer experience that happened. Although there is one aspect of aviation that changed in technology, right? I think that's what's happening in self-driving as well. All these things adding up, and suddenly the end customer experience is much more enhanced.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying there, Simon, in terms of getting a car, to actually drive onto a highway of its own accord, using its own sensors, I'm guessing there's a lot of processing that is going on there for various different reasons. Can you give us a bit of a summary as the kinds of things that car? I guess it's different in the sense that when you're flying by wire with a plane, in theory, you've got complete open skies. I'm massively oversimplifying it. I know that, but how does that differ with a car once it's on the road? What kind of things do you have to consider for a?
So yeah, John, the best way to answer that question is to think about like how we operate a vehicle when we are driving the vehicle, even manually, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you use? You use your eyes, you use your ears probably to see if anyone is honking, and then process that input and within milliseconds, and then issue an output to the vehicle through your hands and feet as to like what the vehicle should do, right? So you are actually the sort of computational system that has actuation abilities at that point, right? So now if you want to create a computer that does your work and does it much more effectively, so now you are not at that point, at least now, where you are able to do context-based decisions as good or as well as a human with a computer, right? So what do? You improve the sort of sensing modalities that you feed into the computer. So if you have your eyes, and if you are able to move your neck and look at the side view mirrors and understand what's happening in the back of your vehicle and in the blind spots and things like that, the way you sort of replace that sort of limitation in observing things and still being inefficient is by increasing the number of cameras. So it's the point I'm trying to make is like when you simplify this a lot, you'll see that it is very resemblant to how humans drive vehicles. Mm-hmm. You have cameras, you have LiDAR. Some companies do not use LiDAR. Most do. There's radar systems that detect like how far another vehicle is. Cameras, obviously, for vision and sort of image recognition and detection of objects and vehicles around you. You also have like a highly capable self-driving compute, which is able to process all these streams of information and create actuation commands, or I'm oversimplifying this extremely here. So the first thing it does is like the perception and the object detection, and then it goes on to predict what that target is going to do. So let's say you have a vehicle, and you're driving past that vehicle, and you have a bicycle lane next to you, right? At that point, if you are a human, if you know that bicyclist is actually blocked by some other object, you predict in your brain that, okay, this human is going to veer towards me, so I need to create some clearance, or I need to slow down. So a computer needs to be able to do this as well for safe operation, right? So there is this sort of not only planning your action, but also predicting what agents outside in the world will do. You through your perception inputs and through all your machine learning training, you do or neural net training, you do this sort of prediction. And then it brings you to the next stage where you plan your motion, you plan the next few seconds or the next few sort of, next meter or so of your motion, and then plot a trajectory and issue relevant controls commands to your actuators to follow that trajectory. So all of this, from a photon hitting the lens of the camera to the vehicle taking an action in response to that photon, needs to happen in the order of milliseconds. Otherwise, you have a huge latency. And if you see a child, and if you do not a child crossing the road, and if you do not necessarily apply your brakes in the right time, then it's a lost cause, right? Like you end up probably running over the child, and that's not good. So that's that. There's that, and there's a lot more sort of redundant systems and redundancy calculations in this you need to do, so that you make sure that you are building a safe system. That even if some of the self-driving computes or some sensing modalities go away, either let's say a bird poops on a camera, or there's a loss of a whole set of sensing, you still are able to fail operationally or fail safe. Right? So all these go into the consideration of building self-driving hardware and software.
I mean, it's fantastic to hear this from somebody that works in the industry, because, obviously to the layman like myself, when we see, and sometimes, look, as far as self-driving cars or elements of that self-driving ability, they've certainly been around for a significant period of time. And I guess, you hear news reports, what you're alluding to there, the safety of self-driving cars. One key thing that's kind of sticks out in my mind is the ethics of some of these machine learning models and AI as well, when, not to be too morbid about it, but if a car that has got all these capabilities has to make the decision to avert some, kind of catastrophe, and the only options are, hitting a child, like you say, or, it's obviously not a joking matter. I don't mean to play this in any morbid way, but, or taking another equally unfavorable option. I mean, does that play into the design and development, and how are those conversations, how do they take place? What does that look like? Have you got any experience in those areas?
So a lot of that has to do with like the culture. Again, the important thing to understand here is that self-driving and autonomous vehicle technology is relatively new. So even regulators do not have a complete understanding of what they should regulate for, or how they should regulate, or in such an event that you talked about, what guidelines should they even issue as to what to prioritize, right? So all these are super gray. It's like, think of it like back when vehicles were being developed from scratch, there was no law for no law saying you need to have seat belts or you need to have airbags and things like that, because they just didn't know all these things that could occur, and even technology was not advanced enough to solve those problems in a reasonable manner, right? The reason you're able to go, at 100 miles per hour these days safely is because you have seat belts and because you have airbags, and for sure that the car has some elements within it to protect your life if something would happen at that speed, right? So coming back to self-driving, at this point, it's more, there are some sort of agencies and associations around the world that kind of put guidelines on paper that companies start following around these safety measures, the functional safety measures in the vehicle. But in general, right, if you look at, notionally look at how humanity deals with these sticky situations in general, you can see that perfectly also in the world of, although it's not a great analogy, you can see it in the world of medicine or surgery, right? Sure. So if you have the option of saving 10 people, like whom do you save? That question arises all the time, and it's an interesting sort of debate topic and an important one as well, because those are the questions. Even if you don't solve the whole thing, you still get enough out of that debate to save a bunch of lives with any action that you end up taking. So I think it's very premature at this point, that regulators are also wondering what they should be regulating for.
Yeah, I mean that kind of, it makes so much sense at the moment when, when technology is advancing at the pace, it's clear even from the job that I do, technology is advancing at such a fast rate at the moment, and clearly even more so in the world of robotics and automation of driving and those kind of things. It's really interesting to me to kind of understand now that, hang on a second, do we now have to factor in, we need people that can talk about these hugely important areas. So if you're doing some software development for a self-driving car, you almost need to have that other, that ethics overlay when you're actually developing. And I know I've heard around sort of biases in artificial intelligence and kind of how you kind of need to develop an AI or a machine learning model to try and root out some of these biases, in its sense. It just, to me, it's mind-blowing now that you factor in all these other layers that go into essentially, to boil it down, it's just somebody that's really technically advanced and decided to start up a company and run down the road of creating, self-driving cars. And now all of a sudden the debate and the conversation has broadened hugely. I mean, is that fair to say is that where the industry is at the moment, Simon, or is that still at an immature stage?
Yeah, I think it's all the challenges that you see in AI, right? So what are the checks and balances for this problem, and who is on the other side? Do we need people on the other side, and all those things? I think it is extremely valid even in the case of self-driving. And I believe there should be another side to check and balance everything in general, right? That's how even democracies work in general. So I feel like this will give rise to a lot of like angles to legal studies. And like political sciences and the way you build policies around these topics. I think it'll give rise to long story short, there is a ton of research opportunity in this because it's a fresh area, right? Like what you work on, if you work on researching these things out, they have a leveraged impact on humanity for the years to come, because they go into defining those laws and things that will eventually save a lot of lives, because companies won't end up doing stupid things.
No, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I mean, can we bring it back a little bit, Simon, in terms of, the actual physical hardware of a car? And, we've talked about all the different senses and sensors that the car kind of has to mimic and do some processing with. I mean, can you give us an idea of the kind of numbers of sensors? Or, I know you mentioned, you touched on radar, LiDAR, obviously cameras, and I'm assuming, that all audible sensors and cameras all over the car. Have you got a rough figure for the average self-driving car and how many sensors that has? And do you have any kind of understanding of the compute power needed to kind of process all of that, like you say, for those split second, those millisecond decisions that they have to make?
Right. So let me address the sensor part first and the compute part second. So from a sensors perspective, if you look at, for example, Tesla vehicles, right, you can go online and look for the number of sensors they have. It's very interesting. I think they have like 2 cameras on the repeaters, 3 cameras facing forward, 1 camera facing backwards, and 2 cameras on the B pillars, from what I know. And I think the number of sensors might have changed since I've been there. But in general, right, so that brings you to 2, 4, 5, 8 sensors, something like that. And on top of that, some companies decide to put thermal cameras as well, which is a great thing because it can see through darkness. It can get an IR image of what's going on from the heat signatures, and that's how it can sort of see any human crossing the road at night, even if there's no light incident on that human, right, or any object for that matter. So yeah, from a camera standpoint, this is generally how it works. From radars, different companies again choose to do it in different ways. So let me give you in a bit. I'll give you like an insight into what goes into these decisions of how much compute or cameras to be or sensors to be using, right? But there's radar, there's lidar, there's inertial navigation systems where you have GPS, of course, also IMUs. You have all these sort of sensing modalities. So on the compute side of things, right, it also depends on it. Some people, a lot of us are preconditioned to thinking that if you have a lot of compute on your vehicle in terms of GPUs or hardware accelerators and things like that, you are better off, right? That's the notion we sort of carry, and that's what we think about around. That is a fundamentally flawed assumption. Although in theory it looks logical, a lot of this has also to do with how you design your software stack, right? And how you utilize resources. If my MacBook is like ramping and like throttling right now, it's not because the hardware is poor. Probably they have like there are some apps on my computer that are not using resources on the hardware right. And this has to do with a lot of things: how well your neural nets are trained, how much compute they need before they get into a certain inference. So there's a lot of those software side optimizations that's necessary for the compute to stay the same, or for you to like improve the compute to make it smaller, so that with lesser compute you'll be able to perform more calculations in an effective way for your application, right? So simple example is if you look at a Tesla vehicle, right? It doesn't look any different from a regular sedan, but it has like all these self-driving computational capabilities as well. Like if this needed a supercomputer that's as large as a building, you wouldn't see that in a vehicle like that, right? So that's because they have done years of work optimizing their code, optimizing the way they compute things, so that has reduced the stress on the hardware. So there's another angle to it. There's like the high perform. I'm going a little bit of technicalities here. Bear with me for a bit. But there's like the high performance side of compute, and then there's like the high integrity side of the compute that people have a distinction between, right? The high performances are more of they take up the heavy load, and you have as far as an integrity of that compute, you build in a certain integrity into that compute as far as how reliable it is and how redundant it is and things like that. But then at the end of the day, you always would prefer to have a fallback that is not as high performing under load, but you have high amounts of like compute reliability on it, where if there are some processes that fall back on another type of compute, it is still able to like handle that and bring the vehicle to a graceful stop or something like that. Think of it more like, if you are to use a microcontroller or a microprocessor which does a thing really well, versus if you want to use your MacBook or PC that does everything okay-ish, right? So the second part is good for like everyday life and things like that. But then if it's a question of life and death, and if everything goes down, you want something that does one thing really well to bring yourself into like a safer domain, right? So these are kind of thought processes around how we sort of design compute in any self-driving vehicle.
So I guess what you're saying there is just that efficiency in code. It's that point of like you say, you don't need this huge mammoth computer that's sat in a car making all these fantastical decisions. It's really back down to basics. You need to put the brake pedal on. Apply brake pedal. It's that efficiency. I guess. Again, massively oversimplifying it, but I guess what you're saying is that compute power is counterintuitive to actually what goes on behind the scenes. Like you say, just to kind of reiterate and bring it back down to its most simplistic terms, that if you want something to be done, that something needs to be done very quickly, and having a huge computer isn't necessarily going to be the answer to that. Is that, have I picked that up right, Simon?
Yeah, you picked it up right, John. And like one more angle to this that I did not bring in yet is the business side of things, right? So if your business team is yelling at you saying, "Hey, our time to market is extremely less. Like, let's get something out and running," the way you are naturally biased to quote unquote throw money at the problem and optimize for things is, okay, let's get, we don't have time to optimize software because that takes a lot of iterations and stuff like that. Let's throw as much compute as we can. Let's probably, like, I don't know, max out all the power we can draw from the batteries of the vehicle. And that's a short term kind of thinking, but it's an easier way in the short term to solve the problem, right? Throw more money at the problem where you have hardware resources available, then no matter how crappy or inefficient your code is, you still can get things to work, right? But then that comes, you can launch a business and you can sort of put a few press releases out about a good performing, like the end product performs well, but at the same time you use a lot of resources. You probably bring down the range of your vehicle a lot because you're now drawing like 10 times the power, I don't know, 10, probably 5 times the power that you would otherwise have drawn if your code was right. So so there are all these factors that go into making these decisions.
No, I mean, it makes complete sense. I suppose, like you say, to bring in the business side, the economies of compute, then, even just doing what you say, putting in, I'm guessing, for self-driving cars, that compute power isn't an issue in this day and age. I'm guessing that, obviously, that the amount of compute power we can get in, like you say, a small little microprocessor is huge, compared to sort of 10, 15 years ago. But those things...
You'll still be surprised by how often self-driving companies in general hit the limits of their compute time and again.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's wrapping your mind, or like you say, that way that the software is developed. And I mean, just to kind of take that a stage further now as well, Simon, in terms of, I'm assuming all these decisions that are being made, to drive the car, they're all being stored. They're being logged locally, in the device. I'm assuming I would have thought quite rightly that all the AI and the ML models are locally stored on the compute power within the car to make these decisions. Obviously, there's no point trying to reach out to the cloud to make these decisions to then go head straight into a wall. But I mean, in terms of all this processing, all this information that's captured on a journey, typically are the cars themselves using machine learning to train themselves as they go, or do they tend to come out with a standard, this is how it's going to work, and much like a patch cycle, I guess, or a software upgrade? Have you got any insights around that and what that is like?
So it's a combination of both, right? It's more the vehicle needs to be able to make decisions that are relevant in its immediate vicinity at that point in time. There are such decisions that need to be made in a matter of milliseconds, right? That's where the vehicle needs to focus on that task that at that immediate point in time and execute that. That's those kinds of decisions. And then there are like collective sort of decisions where a vehicle sees a few different types of modalities that it did not sense properly and things like that, and it creates relevant diagnostics and logs it, and then you look at those logs across vehicles and then do sort of pattern detection on that, if these are like caused by hardware or are they caused by more of a software thing, and then as when you have a fleet out there collectively, then you start diagnosing, okay, I need to fix this and this to not make these happen, and then deploy that change, and it will have it fixed across my vehicle. So it's more of a case by case thing that we are talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes sense. And I guess, with the advent of cloud compute and things like that, all the logs and the monitoring information, I'm assuming are uploaded onto a cloud platform. And it kind of, as I'm speaking to you now, it's kind of making me chuckle in a sense that one of the key areas that I'm personally looking into is Internet of Things and IoT, and really understanding how all these devices, the whole car, effectively could become an IoT device, essentially, with lots of sensor information. Is that kind of how it's working at the moment with self-driving cars and automation of cars?
I think you hit the nail on its head. It is a car is a thing, and the. I mean, even if you remove complete self-driving or level 5 self-driving out of the equation, right? There are a lot of cars these days that like log their data, log user preferences, and things like that, even without being self-driving. So we already have the Internet of Things approach to in the automotive industry. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and I guess it's yeah, like you say, it's building on things that have gone on in the past. Yeah, absolutely. I know you can get apps for various models of cars that will look at your fuel efficiencies and your driving speed, and I think insurance companies insist on younger drivers having little black boxes fitted to kind of monitor the speeds and the braking and acceleration. I guess it's we're being monitored from every angle, and I guess that's going to be just something that we accept when self-driving cars become everyday life, I presume.
Yeah, the insurance company thing. I find that incredibly funny. I feel like, I mean, like, of course, this is my personal opinion, but in the past, I've subscribed to that a couple times because I don't know, it brought my insurance premiums down by a few dollars or something like
Yeah.
that. But I feel like it's just too intrusive, right? You can log in and you can see, hey, you've braked, you've like pressed the brakes too much today, or you've accelerated too much, today, or you see all these logs in your face. And there have been more than one instances where you want to probably save your car from hitting someone or something, and then you think, oh, this device will probably log me, so let me be a little relaxed on that. So I don't like that sort of bias that it introduces into people, right? So
I
but
think
yeah.
So yeah, Simon, it makes me laugh actually when we talk about things like that. I've got an app actually on my phone for tracking my kids. Just a GPS app, and even those apps, they're technically nothing to do with the car. They can detect when you're traveling over a certain speed, and they make that assumption that you're in the car. It comes out and it gives you all of these kind of almost like prods in the side. It's having that artificial nudge in the side to say, well, you may have been traveling a bit too fast there, or you may have accelerated a bit too quick there. I agree. I mean, it's certainly an area that I guess as individuals we're not overly keen to kind of have thrust in our face. But I mean, I guess it's like lots of things with technology. My gut feel is that it will be something we're going to have to live with at some stage. Do you see it like that, Simon, or is there anything else going on there?
Yeah, I mean, being an engineer, I am a very sort of data-driven person myself, and I like data, right? But it also is, it's a balance between how this data influences a certain human behavior, and is it worth it? Do the pros of that action outweigh the cons of it, right? Like this basic economics in its traditional sense. So yeah, if I have an insurance company saying brake less, brake less, brake less, don't accelerate too much, don't accelerate aggressively, and things like that, it preconditions my brain to think twice, even in a case of emergency, if it's worth it or not, right? So I don't want to be spending threads in my brain doing that calculation when I'm about to have a very terrible scenario on the road, right? So my point is that I feel like that part where it biases people into making that additional sort of monetary calculation. Oh, I have been over my braking quota today, or something like that. That'll be a ridiculous thing to be biased, with. So,
But it's a hugely valid point, and like you say, because I guess of the the relative sort of maturity of where we're at with that, I guess it's too easy to look at those kind of things and say, yeah, that's a great idea. That it'll bring your insurance down, but then what is the adverse effect of that? And that's a brilliant example, in my opinion, where you as a driver of that car are now starting to have to think differently about your driving. That could have significant impact on your ability to drive safely, potentially. So like you say, it's just, from my point of view as somebody not in that field, it seems quite a minefield of research and ideas, and where they all come together. And I guess that's what innovation is about.
Yeah, John. I think all the assertions that you made are kind of, I agree with them. It has a certain impact on our mentalities in everyday life. This is an interesting new topic, and it takes us back to your point, where it opens up a lot of fields about ethics and things like that people need to research on. So I encourage a lot of people to get into like robotics and self-driving and think about these tough problems, that your work will have a leveraged impact over the years to come and centuries to come.
I mean, it's just such a really rich and interesting area, I guess, where you are on that bleeding edge of technology with robotics, and those decisions and the whole culture, as you say, and the way that we work is almost up for being rewritten, and we're defining this as we move forward as a race. And it's just it's I find it really exciting and great to see these kind of things. I mean, in terms of, sticking with obviously robotics for the time being, some of the videos I've recently seen across things like LinkedIn and Twitter is from Boston Dynamics. They've released a few videos lately of really like a humanoid robot that, wow, you look at it and, I remember back, over the years, you see all the talk of robotics and robots and, things that are going to come into our houses and start helping us do our washing and ironing. But wow, I was really taken aback with that whole, how human-like the upstanding robots look, and I think they even had like a little dog that was kind of used for tracking, and you can clearly see the applications of those robots are unbelievable. I mean, have you got any views on them, in terms of how they operate, the kind of development that's gone into those kind of things?
It's surreal to see how they're taking over, isn't it?
No, very much Terminator-like, isn't it? At the moment, is what crossed my mind.
I don't think this will happen overnight, right? This whole taking over, AI taking over, robotics taking over thing won't happen overnight. All of us sort of drive today. Of course, by definition, the vehicles or automotive devices or vehicles in general have taken over our lives. Phones have taken over our lives. Computers have taken over our lives, and we don't seem to like complain about it unless you have some app snooping on you and then causing alleged political consequences and things like that, and then we start talking about all of these things, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But to get back to your point, John, I think the Boston Dynamics, the way I really love how they bring a sort of adoption angle to everything they do, right? Like they didn't have to do that dance, they didn't have to do all of those things, probably of like less practical and monetary impact, but it is really, being a student of science, being a student of engineering, I used to underplay marketing and the importance of these sound bites a lot, right? I was like, what the heck's the use of it? Probably not worth it and things like that. But over the years, I've come to really embrace that it is essential to have all of these things and get humanity as a whole excited about these things, right? And humanity already has certain biases around, oh, we like things that, have things to do with the arts. We like creative stuff. It's to do with the way, we humans have evolved. We love, new creations and looking at something, music or dance, and, that kind of, arts exists as a thing that we cherish for a reason, right? And bringing that into technology to bring people, to get people excited about that, I think that's a fabulous move that Boston Dynamics did in that sort of video. But even otherwise, I think they are proving time and again that it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of
I mean, just to pick you up on that point around sort of the marketing or the kind of the awareness, I guess, is probably the best way to put it. But I'm very much like you. I've been into sort of computer science for the majority of my life. Things like space exploration and robotics and computer and tech kind of excites me as a person. And I guess when you factor in, previous guests that I've had on this show, we've talked about things like skills gap and, that awareness of engineering and, getting more and more people involved. Like a video like Boston Dynamics have done, or the recent Mars, the rover landing, Perseverance on Mars. Those kind of things, broadcast to the public are there to perform a very clear thing, in my opinion, is to spark that creative juice, I guess. I mean, you put it so brilliantly that the arts, music and acting and things like that, and performance art is very much embraced by many cultures, globally, I would imagine, in every corner of the world. And I think technology and engineering is always seen as that, in my opinion anyway, that academic approach. And to be honest with you, I think my own personal observation is that when it comes to software engineering or robotics or, all of these kind of new fandangled technologies that we find ourselves working with, it's very much about having that mix of creative, that arts and that technical know-how. Do you see it in that same way, Simon? And I guess as a follow-up question, do you kind of have any kind of hints or tips or tricks to kind of bring people into the robotics industry and what that might look like for new people coming into the industry?
Yeah, to answer your first question, I mean, I think we see it everywhere, right? Why do cars need to be painted? Will cars not drive if they are not in different colors? They will, right? Why do functionally the car performs like perfectly, well if it's probably not painted that much? Why do people prefer different colors of paint? Why do people why do companies go to lengths to impact the design of their vehicle and make sure that it's designed a certain way when it comes to look and feel, right? All of these things are to bring an artistic angle to all the technology we bring into the world, right? Or design and build. It's super important. It's a part of life. And I mean, I don't want any engineering student at all to be, averse to even acknowledging the fact that these other areas of studies, especially on the creative side, but also like economics and commerce and things like that, have nothing to do in the world, or like, why do they even exist? They exist for a valid reason. All these areas that are extinct now, by now, are areas which humanity didn't find a use for, and it naturally filtered. They naturally filtered themselves out. Arts hasn't filtered itself out until now. It's for a reason, because it's essential. It's essential for us to have a enjoyable life, as humans. John, to your point of people getting into robotics and self-driving and things like that, people often ask me, what area of study should I be in? How do I position myself to get into this and things like that? I think you should, no matter what field of study you are in, pretty much all fields of study that you are in, like material science or engineering or business, finance, be it marketing or design or even like law, ethics, all of these things. I'm not going to sit and name all of them, but all of these things, literally all these fields, a lot of these fields known to humanity, right, are, if you are in any one of those, there's an easy way where you can find your bridge into self-driving, right? Like it's very likely that the self-driving world or the robotics world in general will need your expertise, right? It's because it's such a diverse area. It's not like software engineering where you need to know a few languages and you need to know how to code on a computer. Imagine you look at this as an area where okay, you're building a company that builds the software and the hardware and a business around it and commercializes it, right? So you get to pick and choose anything, or what, no matter, like, depending on what area you are in, you get to get involved and impact it with your expertise. So I think no matter what area you are in, you can draw that bridge. What you need to understand is, I think a good place to start is read all these case studies, about around self-driving vehicles, how certain companies became successful in self-driving, how self-driving technology generally works, and then you can trace back and start thinking about how can you bring all the experience and expertise that you already have into that world and influence that. So I think that's an interesting path to go down.
No, absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think, I mean, in terms of the numbers of companies, I don't know if you've got any insights or knowledge around. Obviously, self-driving cars, I'm guessing, your options are pretty limited if you're going to be working in those kind of areas, because I'm guessing there aren't that many companies putting what I'd imagine to be quite a lot of investment in terms of financial capital to kind of back up those kind of things. So the likes of Tesla and other companies. In terms of robotics, I presume obviously that may be a little bit more accessible to graduates coming out of university. Maybe they've got, like you say, computer science or engineering or some form of education related to a specific area. I guess I'm right in saying that, am I, Simon, in terms of from a robotics point of view? Even robotics is quite a niche area, but it's such an exciting area. Have you got any kind of hints around where people might go to look for those kind of roles or those kind of opportunities?
I think especially, in terms of tactical advice, right? I think there are a lot of university startups or startups near universities these days that are, very sort of robotics driven and robotics oriented and have decent funding to support good stuff, right? So just an example in the US is you can see a lot of robotics companies congregated around, like, Boston, like MIT, Harvard, the Boston area, as well as this, Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, of course. So you can see, I'm noticing a pattern where there are like robotics companies congregated around these university settings.
Sure.
So I think that it has a decent correlation to that, and I think that will help to look for companies. But in general, right, like top robotics companies, a Google search will give you all like a good list of companies, and then you can go look at what those companies do, what excites you, and start from there. And I think to look for jobs in the robotics space, I think it's not going to be a super Herculean task, and it's only going to get easier and easier to find opportunities as we go along. But because the number of people increase in the space, it's also going to bring in a lot of competition.
No, that's perfect. Thanks so much for that, Simon. Well, to be honest, Simon, I could probably sit here all night and talk to you about this because it's such a really, hugely interesting area of conversation. But I mean, before we wrap up, are you working on anything else at the moment? What have you got in the pipeline? Have you got any little side projects going on? Anything like that you've got at the moment, Simon?
Yeah, I always love working on side projects all the time. I mean, that's my sort of stress relief kind of aspect of things, because I like building stuff that help a lot of people. So yeah, one of the things that I'm working on is, especially in the US, right? I gained permanent residence in the US. Through this employment-based path called people with extraordinary ability, a green card kind of thing. Mm-hmm. My point here is there's a very few people that sort of went that path, and that's why there is very little documentation or very little sort of publicly available knowledge around that, except the thing that the government puts out and what the qualifications are, right? And people usually think it's like for the Einsteins and the Nobel laureates of the world and things like that. which it does have a high bar to get granted, but it's not necessarily just for the Einsteins, or you need to have a PhD, or you need to have one crazy awards or anything like that. Sure. The EB-1A green card, as they call it, is a method of permanent residence or path to permanent residence in the US for people of extraordinary ability. And I'm building this course from my experience, from my personal experience. Yeah, so I was able to. I'm not a person who has like a Nobel Prize or a Grammy or an Oscar or even a PhD or anything like that, but through consistent work and deliberate action towards doing the right work to satisfy the criteria that the government asks for, things like that, I was able to successfully petition and get my EB-1A green card for extraordinary ability in my field, right? So if there's anyone who wants to or is considering moving to the US under an exceptional ability visa or an exceptional ability green card, this course is meant for them. So I'll leave the link with you. If it helps anyone, they can sort of enroll and make use of that. That's one project that I'm working on.
What's that called, Simon? What's the URL?
I'll put it in smartgreencard.com.
Smartgreencard.com. Okay, no, I'll put that in the chat, the blog article list. So any links we talk about now, they'll all be in there. So yeah, cool.
Sounds good. Yeah, there are two more things that I'm working on that I want to point out. Yeah. The second thing I'm considering working on is a lot of people actually ask for hey, I'm in data science, how do I get into self-driving? Or I'm in finance, how do I get into self-driving? There are all these sort of niche areas that people are in that they want to get into self-driving, but they don't have like the right oversight or the right knowledge as to what tactical actions they can take to make their way into self-driving, right? So I'm putting together some like mini courses for that, and if you are interested, I'll again leave the link with John. You can put your name in there and enroll or like wait list for the course. And once they are released, you'll be the first one to hear from me, and you can decide if you want to take it or not. That's the second thing I'm working on to help people transition into self-driving and robotics, because this is a space of immense promise that I also believe in. The third thing I've been working on for a while, and that's going on, is a awesome latex-based resume making tool called Resume Puppy. A lot of people, they get confused around, okay, what format should my resume be in and things like that. So if you are to make your resume, go to resumepuppy.com and make your resume, because we have built a tool where the friction of worrying about the format and worrying how this will come out. We use latex in the backend. So, and you use a graphical user interface. So you don't usually, in Overleaf or anything like that, you need to code to get a good latex resume. But on Resume Puppy, you use a graphical user interface and just get an easy resume made with latex. So that's how we help people. Go ahead and make your resume there. If you are interested in that. So yeah, these are all the side projects that I keep myself busy with, John.
If you're not busy enough in your day job, eh? I mean, that sounds fantastic, Simon. And and thanks so much for sharing that, because I think, just to pick you up on that training area, I mean, it sounds like a fantastic idea there, because, we know certainly in my profession, sort of cloud learnings and things like that are in abundance. But I think when you hone in on a very niche area like robotics or self-driving vehicles, then yeah, I mean, there seems to be, that kind of content would be invaluable for people looking to break in. So, yeah, absolutely. Any links will be in the article. We'll put a link in the description below. So feel free to click on those and reach out to yourself, Simon. I mean, to wrap it up now, I can't stress how thankful I am for joining me on this episode. It's been such a fantastic conversation. Really, thank you, Simon, for your time this evening. And obviously, anything that comes of this, we'll keep in touch and maybe do a check back video in a few months' time to see how things are going on.
Absolutely, pleasure talking to you, John, and looking forward to all those amazing chats in the future as well.
No, absolutely. Thanks so much, Simon. We'll sign off there, and I'll catch you soon.
See ya.